All right, well, hello everybody. Let's listen in on the recording. I'm doing this presentation from my little hardware lab where, I got PSD and everything, so I can look at the stuff when we get to it. But let's start with what the TRAU is. So it is a transcoder rate adapter unit or transcoding rate adaptation unit or adaptation or adaptation. Different people say it differently. Uh, so it is a component in a classic circuit switch GSM architecture. So if you don't have any IP-based modern stuff anyway, if it's all classic TDM based, then you have 64 kilobit per second speech channels, just like in your traditional PSTN, ISDN. These are your PCM speech, and then you have the compressed speech channels where you have GSM codec frames, also known as TRAU frames, which appear on ABIS. So TRAU is the box that goes from one to the other, and that's where you're doing the speech encoding and decoding. All the codecs run the DSP functions for speech calls happen in a TRAU, and also for data calls for CSD, it stops being a transcoder and becomes a rate adapter. That's where the rate adapter part comes from, and then yeah, that's a much simpler function. There's a lot less work being done there. So most of the DSP power is for speech transcoding. But most people in this community probably already know that. So, but what people might not be as familiar with is how does it look like physically? Where does it actually fit into the architecture? Because the specs will say that it can be part of the MSC, it can be part of the BSC. So this very vague language in the specs. Well, here you can see in this little diagram, this is how, at least with Nokia and Siemens, that's how they did it. So there is this interface called ATER. So it doesn't really appear in GSM specs, except one place. You will see, A interface and ABS all over the place, but where is ATER? There's only one GSM spec that actually, 3GPP spec that mentions ATER, and that's a TFO spec. And it uses this type of language, ABS/ATER, without ever explaining what ATER actually is. But once I started looking at vendor documentation from Nokia, then it became very obvious what this is. So basically, they stick the trowel between the MSC and the BSC, and now you have the traditional A over here, you got traditional ABS over here, but now you also got ATER here. So ATER, you have the same frame format as on ABS, but it corresponds more logically to A, because when the MSC and the BSC talk signaling, they have this information element in BSS map called what's it called? It's called the CIC, Circuit Identity Code. And that's how the MSC and the BSC agree which time slot and which E1 circuit number the call is going to be on. So for every E1 circuit, every time slot over here on this interface, you got the circuit identity code. But this TRAU does a one-to-one mapping. So for every time slot here identified by CIC, you have a corresponding sub-time slot over an ATER. So the TRAU never does any kind of reshuffling. Once it's set up, there's a one-to-one mapping between the two. And then this guy, the BSC, basically acts like a switch, like a traditional circuit switch, but instead of switching 64K PCM speech channels, it is switching these encoded channels, 16K, 8K, or 4.5 rate. And so it should be very obvious what the result of it is. You can see at the bottom, you're going to expand everything 4x or 8x. And so for cost reasons, to pay less for these lines, it's better to stick the trowel next to the MSC, but logically it's just its own box. So terminology, again, like where does this TCSM come from? So, is it just, but are we talking about a single channel? Are we talking about a whole big thing? So that, don't need to read all the detail. Yeah, why I picked this particular model? Documentation. Documentation is the hardest thing to find. I mean, of course, the hardware itself is hard to find too. But if you don't have documentation, you don't even know what part number to ask for when talking to surplus dealers, because they need part numbers, and without documentation, you don't even know part numbers. So, but with this one, I was able to find enough documentation to tell me so I know what to get. Yeah. So let's see. So yeah, what I am putting together here is nowhere close to the official config. The official config is this. And well, let's just say my little shop over here is not big enough to accommodate something that big. Uh, so you obviously need a smaller configuration. But again, thanks to the documentation, I was able to see what's actually inside the giant rack. And so in the official config, you have up to 8 of these guys and up to 4 of these guys. But just one of each would be enough for a minimal config. And I don't have this guy yet. So of the hardware that I've acquired so far that I'll be showing today, I only have this portion. But the surplus vendor from whom I'm getting everything, Shields E, recommended by Harold, thank you very much. So they have, yeah, they do have all of the parts, including the ones which are still yet to be acquired. The parts for this, they do have them. Just have to buy them. We'll get to that. So, yeah. Let's see. More on architecture. So here, yeah, and I posted these slides ahead of time, so hopefully some people read them already to get better idea of what the architecture of all of this is. Uh, so logically, we're just looking at a single unit here. So even if I had a big giant telecom, even if I had the full rack, if I had the full rack, I would have 8 logical units. Each of these is like its own entity for software configuration purposes. And each of these units handles a single E1 circuit toward the BSC, a single 8R. Now, this equipment was actually made to support both NC environments, the American one, and ETSI, the European. So it can be both T1 or E1. But of course, my natural preference would have been to go for the NC T1 version just because it's so much more familiar to me. But in terms of parts availability, the parts that are different between the NC version and the ETSI version, for those parts, the NC version seems to be a lot harder to get. Could even be unobtainium, I'm not quite sure. But so it looks like the surplus is probably coming from Eurasia. That's probably why. But for my purposes in the lab, it doesn't matter. So I was like, okay, well, if the E1 version is easier to obtain, then I'll go for the E1 version. So that's how I'm approaching this currently. Uh, so yeah, so it has a maximum, because I mentioned there's the expansion. So you've got a single E1 line coming in from the BSC, and a TRAU will expand it to, depending on how, if I had a full config, then with full rate subchannels, it would be a 4x expansion. So there'd be 40 ones going on the A. And if I were doing half rate, it would be an 8x expansion, but there is only a maximum of 7 E1s in this architecture to the A, for a total of maximum of 8, where one of them is the 8R. But again, I'm going for the minimal config. So in the minimal config, I will only have a single E1 on each side. Single E1 8R and a single E1 A. So yeah. So let's see. Yeah, so here I mentioned again, and hopefully some people read the slides ahead of time, but if not, the obvious question that anyone would ask, looking from the outside, well, what the hell are you going to do with a TRAU just by itself, without the BSC, without the MSC, I don't even have any E1 based BTS hardware. So if I don't have any other network element from the TDM-based GSM architecture, just a TRAU, what am I going to do with it? I mean, like I was exchanging emails earlier with Dieter about his Siemens VSC and TRAU. He's saying, no, this TRAU can only work with the Siemens VSC. It can't work any other way. I mean, that may be the case with Siemens. I don't know, but in the case of this Nokia unit, they do have this little escape hatch. They do have, which I'll show when we get to the hands-on hardware part. It has an RS-232 port on the unit itself, and according to the documentation I could find, it should be possible to configure the unit using this RS-232 instead of its preferred native LAPD control from the BSC. So if it's configured locally through RS-232, then what I'm hoping will happen is it will behave like it's supposed to behave in regular operation, where anytime dynamically in real time a call is switched to one of the sub time slots on ATER, as soon as the TRAU sees the valid uplink frames, that's its initialization signal. That it boots up the DSP and selects the correct codec based on the TRAU UL frame type. So at least that's what's supposed to happen. We'll see if it actually does. Um, so, all right, hardware showtime. As you can see, I kept the slides short so we can get to the fun part. So let's get to the fun part. Yeah, so this board right here, this is the TR16 board. TR16 means there are 16 transcoder channels on this board. So this is the version that's officially meant for E1 environments. The other version that's officially meant for T1, that will be called TR12. Presumably, it will only have 12 channels. So, but this one, because it's got 16 channels, it handles one half of an E1 circuit on the A interface. So in the minimal config that I'm building, I have two of these, and I have a second one that looks just like this one. But whereas if someone had a bigger configuration, they would have to have two of these per E1 circuit going toward the MSC A side. And the same way with the T1 config, for every T1 going to the A side, we have to have two of the TR12s. So now let me see if I can point at one of the actual DSP chips. So now there's a DSP chip that I'm pointing directly at. I don't know if you can see chip markings or not. But if you can't see the chip markings, I do have notes, just plain ASCII notes where I wrote them. So the chip appears to be custom. I see a TI logo on the DSP chip, but the part number does not appear anywhere other than the only place where I could find the part number was in a notice some years ago with TI saying they're discontinuing that part, a bunch of others. And in that notice of discontinuation, they have a bunch of standard parts, the C54X family, as well as these weird skunkwork parts. So I'm guessing that this is a skunkworks part. Sorry, for the Europeans, that's an American term used in like aerospace industry and whatnot for black projects. So skunkworks chip basically means made for some customer, custom whatever in it. So, but my hunch, without proof, my hunch is that this is probably a C54X family DSP, which is the exact same DSP as a very much beloved TI Calypso chip. So, except that I'm guessing that the actual operational code that does a real TRAUs job is probably soft downloaded, but there's probably a mask ROM in there for the booting part of it. That's just my guess. And on this board, immediately adjacent to each DSP, in fact, you can see it in the camera frame. You see this, you see the four-sided chip. I think it's a QFP package for the actual DSP, and then you see what package is that? Yeah, then I think it's like a SOIC package. So if I can use my finger here with the SD strap on, this is the DSP, And these are the RAM chips I'm pointing at. Uh, so uh, so the RAM chip is 64K by 16, and there is one for each DSP, so it's very obvious that's where they store, or at least the data. Obviously, the data has to be there, but I'm guessing probably the code is also there downloaded. But what's interesting about this board is there are 16 DSPs on it, but there is no single processor that's for the board as a whole. The only components that are present that are for the board as a whole, that big lattice chip there, that's a CPLD. So it's not an FPGA, it's a CPLD. The difference being with FPGAs, you have an external configuration memory and you have to load it at runtime, power up, whereas CPLD has a non-volatile configuration elements inside. And my understanding is that it's literally alive at power up as if it was fused. Um, so, and the available documentation that I could find even tells you how to hook up the programmer to reprogram that CPLD. Very nice documentation. Of course, we don't have any images or anything, but tells you how to hook it up. But just the complexity of that CPLD, there's way too little logic capacity in that CPLD to do anything really complex. Obviously, there can't possibly be a software processor or anything in it, and there is also a memory chip somewhere. Yeah, this memory chip that. Let's see, yeah, that I'm trying to center the view on. This memory chip is 128K by 8. So I don't know what the boot process here is. It's very obvious that the code is loaded by the controller card, which I'm going to show next, over this bus. So this here, the view. So this connector here that you're seeing, it looks to me like a VME bus connector. Say at least the physical connector is the same. Of course, the pinout is custom. So the pinout again is given in the documentation. Very nice. We do have a pinout for this 96 pin 32 by 3 connector. It's a DIN 41 something. Yeah, 41612, I think, is the DIN of it. So this connector is the bus interface. So according to the documentation, uh, we've got a PCM highway interface in there, and also a control bus. And the control bus, it's a microprocessor bus. There are 8 data lines, and there is some larger number, more than 8, but fewer than 16, something like 13 or something, address lines and read-write signals. So that's how the controller talks to these things through this microprocessor style bus. And that's also how the firmware must be loaded for the DSPs. I'm kind of curious how they boot. Is it like a parallel thing to where the circuit in the CPLD may be set up in such a way where the TRCO does a write and it goes in parallel to all of the SRAM chips for all 16 DSPs? Or is it like a serial boot thing to maybe like a daisy chain to where they initially tell one DSP to boot, it goes through its boot process, and then it gives a signal to the next DSP in the chain. Now you go boot, and then eventually all 16 boot that way. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud as an engineer how this could have been implemented. But this is definitely where the transcoder happens. And the important thing from a retro restoration point of view, the important part is that this board does not have any flash on it. There is no flashed firmware anywhere on this board. The only non-volatile configuration memory that exists on this board are the configuration bits inside the CPLD, and I doubt those had a lot of changes ever. And I'm hoping, of course, that the CPLD is correctly programmed at the factory and that we don't have to mess with it, because obviously reverse engineering the CPLD would be not, probably not feasible. So this is the TRCO. I'm going to put this board back in its ESD bag, and then we will move on to the next board, which is the TRCO. So let me get this baby back up. Let's see. So this is the other board. This is the TRCO. So this board right here is the central brain for the entire TCSM2 unit. And so where unit, as I discussed before, is the handles a single E1 toward the BSC, single E1 on ATER. That's a unit. So for each unit, you have this board that acts as the headmaster for the whole thing. And so you see two connectors on the back. This connector here is the one that we'll look at the backplane later, but this is the one that connects to all the transcoder cards in the parallel bus. And this connector here, this is the one that connects to the exchange terminal. So this is where to talk to the one circuits. So that's but and on the front of it, looking on the front, that is where we have, this is the RS-232 port, real traditional DB25 RS-232. It's so rare to see that kind of beauty. So there is the RS-232 port, and then there are the two little coaxial connectors there are for synchronization, but they're meant only for debug and test. So I don't think I'll be using them because there's minimal documentation on those. Some LEDs for status, not much more than that. So, but now let's look at the components. Okay, so I'm going to try a different method. I'm going to try laying the board flat down and pointing the webcam from the top. Maybe this method will make it easier to see. Um, so here, uh, right now, I am zooming in on this component. And so this is a 16.384 megahertz oscillator. I can't tell if it's an OCXO or TCXO. Based on the size of the can, I would think OCXO. But when I tried doing web searches for the markings that are on the part, the only hits I could find say TCXO. But of course, it's not even a data sheet. I see people selling this part with no documentation, and in the sales list, and they say TCXO. Are they correct, or is it actually OCXO? I don't know. But whichever of the two it is, this is the synchronizer for the whole thing, which is important because in this architecture, the timing has to be perfectly matching across all of the interfaces. So this unit always talks on a single E1 circuit on ATER, and also anywhere from 1 to 7 circuits on the A. And so anywhere from 2 circuits in total to 8 circuits in total, they all have to be in perfect sync. And the traditional timing distribution, the way it's meant to work officially, is you take, when you configure it, you take out of the circuits that go toward the MSC, you choose one of them as the timing master. And so the TRAU will then take the timing from that chosen E1 circuit. It will discipline this guy right here to the timing source. And then this little oscillator will drive everything else that happens in the TRAU, including the other E1 interface that goes on a tear to the BSC. So then the BSC will receive timing from the TRAU through this manner, and then the BSC will pass this timing on to all the A-BIS circuits, to all the BTSs, and the BTSs get that time. I mean, you'll know here how the E1 BTSs get their timing, but now you're looking at basically higher up the chain of how this happens, and we're looking at the oscillator component that does it. And you can, for debug purposes, you can also make it free running, because over here, let's see if I'm getting a good view. Probably not. Uh, Yeah, so this guy right here, this is the DAC. This is the DAC that drives the control input on this TCXO or VCXO, OCXO or TCXO, whatever it is, but it also has the voltage control input. And so you can put it in free running mode where you can manually set a control word for debug purposes, or in normal operation, it will slave itself to timing from one of the interface circuits. So that's a timing block. Now let's look at the processor. So this is a 186, and this part I already knew even before I got the hardware in my hands, because in the documentation they have a little block diagram, and on the block diagram they show CPU 186. So that's good to know for reverse engineering purposes if we have to go down hardware firmware hacking path, which I'll cover. So then we have another lattice FPGA, another FPGA CPLD. So this lattice CPLD, the physical part is exactly the same as on the transporter parts. Of course, we have no way of knowing if the logic inside of it is same or different. Probably a little different because just different function of the card, but same part. But for our software brain of hacking purposes, I want to point out these parts right here. So you should be seeing 8 chips. So there were 4 in one row and 4 in the next row. So originally all of them had stickers on them. This one I pulled the sticker off, but originally it had a sticker on it just like the other 7. And so the presence of these stickers, when I first looked at it, made it very obvious that these must be parts that were programmed before they were populated on the board. And furthermore, by looking at the physical shape of the shape and size of the IC package, knowing that this is a PLCC32 with 8 pins on the wide side and 7 pins on the narrow side, just from my experience in that package shape, I immediately made a guess that this is probably a 28 FO10. And so when I pull the sticker off, guess what I see underneath? I don't know if this camera will capture the markings or not, but it says AM29FO10B. So my guess was exactly correct. It is, in fact, the exact flash chip part that I thought it would be. But that, of course, raises mysteries of its own, because 29FO10 is a 1 megabit flash chip. Of course, they usually use bit capacitors rather than bytes. So this is a 1 megabit flash chip. And so now the 8186 has a 16-bit wide memory bus. So seeing that we've got how the chips are arranged, how we got 4 rows, how we have 2 rows of 4 chips, I'm guessing that they go across the data bus like this. How this is one bank across the data bus, this is another bank across the bus, this is another. So each pair is probably going across a 16-bit wide data bus. But the mystery is this. When we add up total capacity, each of these chips being 1 megabit, now we've got 8 megabits in total, or 1 megabyte in total. That's a that's the size of the address space. 8186 has a 20-bit address bus. So it can only address 1 megabyte, just like the old DOS 8086 seemed then. So if they have so much flash, that the flash alone would already fill the whole address space, leaving no room for RAM or anything else, it's very obvious that this flash cannot be directly mapped. It has to be some kind of bank switched memory scheme. And of course, that raises another question: why do they need so much flash? That's definitely a mystery. The size of the flash was surprising to me. But also, another thing that we see here is we see this chip in a socket. So this chip is in a socket, and it's a PLCC44, and I originally had a sticker. So you can see here, these are the stickers that I pulled off. One of the sticker I pulled off of this. So I pulled the sticker from this guy, and I pulled the sticker from this guy. And so the sticker that was on this guy, I originally sent something like TRCO RAM. But when I looked up the actual part number, the marking on the chip underneath the sticker, I quickly realized this is an OTP PROM. It is not flash. It is not in-system reprogrammable. It is a one-time programmable part. Basically, it's the same part as if it was a UV EEPROM, except that the IC package does not have the window of ultraviolet arrays, so it becomes an OTP part. So it's very obvious that this is the boot ROM for the card, and it's also socketed. It's definitely refreshing to see. I see how, from looking at this design, I can feel that the engineers who built this thing, that they felt very strongly about recoverability. They did not want the hardware to be breakable. They designed such a thing to where you cannot break it. So the boot ROM is OTP. It's not programmable from inside the system, so you can't possibly break it by hacking around. And this boot ROM, apparently, according to what I could pick up from documentation, can talk at least. I don't know if it can talk on LAPD or not. Um, I don't know, it might be too much, but it can for sure talk on a UART, RS-232. So if all of these chips, if all of these flash chips are blank or corrupt, you could still load a code through a RS-232 port using the facilities of this boot ROM. Of course, you have to have the images, and we don't have them. So, uh, and so seeing that there are stickers on the flash chips, that gives me hope that they are actually program corrected, because if they're not, we'll be screwed. We don't have the code image, don't have any place to get the code image. But seeing that, I'm guessing like maybe in the earliest prototype versions, or maybe like very earliest production runs, they probably populated blank chips here and then loaded on the production line through a 32 port. But that gets slow after a while. So once they got the code all stabilized, they probably just did a pre-program before putting chips on the board. So I'm hoping that the image inside all that flash is going to be good. So the thing with the flash image, this is where you get uncertainties, and this is part of the reason why I was paying so much attention to the processor architecture, how we could possibly hack it, because it might become necessary. Well, first of all, there is the possibility of the management interface being password locked. So what if, let's say, someone previous owner set a password on the management interface that we don't know, then how do we recover? That might require reading out the flash and reverse engineering the firmware. The other issue is the feature that I really, really, really want to play with the most is TFO. And according to the documentation, TFO is grouped together with AEC and noise suppression, those optional features I don't care about. But all three of those, AEC, noise suppression, and TFO, were called quote unquote optional features, in the sense, documentation says something like, these options are available if you purchase them. And I was like, oh no. Are we talking a different firmware build with them included versus excluded? Is there some kind of license key you have to enter? What the heck is that? We don't know. So we won't know until we power up this baby and start playing with it. But I was already thinking, okay, fallback. Yeah, yeah. If I'm lucky, the TFO option will just be present. I can just enable it. But if we're not lucky, what then? So, and that's why I was thinking that it'll be highly unlikely for them to make a separate DSP firmware. I don't think they made a separate DSP firmware build with TFO versus non-TFO. So the artificial restriction, if there is one, it's got to be on a 186 control processor. So if we can reverse engineer the 186 firmware, I've done. Back in my younger days when I was a kid, I did so much DOS x86 reverse engineering. So may have to do some of that here. Uh, and figure out how to basically turn TFO back on if it is disabled. So, but that remains to be seen. And of course, what would be the inroads if we have to go down that path? What I would have to do, I would have to pull this prom out of the socket and read it out. I have to construct a little reader contraption, or did a little bit of preliminary research. So build a contraption for reading out the content of this OTP prom, which must be the boot code, and then reverse engineer that first and see, figure out the memory map and whatnot, and then figure out a way to get to the other flash chips, start reading out those and see from there. But it'll be a lot of work. I'm so hoping I don't have to go down this path. I'm hoping that the DFTFO will just work, but always have to have a fallback. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. So that's so this is the controller card. And it also has a RAM. I forgot to point out the RAM. I don't remember what the capacity is. Yeah, I don't remember. But in my notes, I got plain ASCII notes I made on this thing. And in the notes, I've identified the RAM chip here, so we know how much RAM this thing has. It's not much. I think it's like 256 kilobytes or something like that. Yeah, it doesn't have a whole lot of RAM. Uh, So, oh, and also forgot to mention, we've got these three guys. We got this guy, this guy, this guy. So these are HDLC controllers. Out of the three chips, two are dual HDLC controllers and one is a single HDLC controller. So you got a total of 5 HDLC channels, which agrees with the documentation. So why do they need 5 HDLC channels? What are they for? Well, so on this board, if you notice, all of these boards that we've examined so far, none of them have the physical E1 interface. So where is the physical E1 or T1 interface? That one is on a separate module called the exchange terminal, which we'll get to. And the exchange terminal sits in a different chassis connected by some kind of ribbon cable, from what I can tell, which again, we'll get to that. So the exchange terminal sits in a different chassis. It's got its own processor, its own firmware, and they use an HDLC protocol, some kind of also proprietary LEPD protocol, to talk from this board right here we're looking at right now to the onboard processor inside the exchange terminal module, the 2XT1 or 2XE1 module. So they have that HDLC channel going. So since we can have a maximum of 4 of those exchange terminals, we need 4 HDLC channels for that purpose. And then the fifth HDLC channel, that one is actually goes inside the E1 circuit on 8 there, and that's how it normally talks to the DSC in regular operation. So that's what the 5 HDLC channels are for. So, okay, well, we've covered this board. So I'm gonna put, I'm gonna put this webcam down. So now, so now what I'm gonna do is I'll put this board back in this little ESD bag, and then we'll look at the back plane, because that's another interesting part of the back plane of this thing. Oops. Let's see. Bag. Plug it in. I can turn this on. Try a different approach. Putting this thing back into its bag. Oh, I think I pulled into the bag here. Now we again cover this back up. Away for now. All right. So now we are reaching for the chassis. So this big and heavy, somewhat heavy, not too heavy, if I can still lift it. So this unit is the chassis. This is the TC1C chassis. So this is the inside where the modules go, and then this is the back side. Now, to get a closer look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this thing down on the ground, and I'll point the webcam at it. So we'll look at the inside first. So I got this thing. Hold it. All right. Let's see if we can get view. All right. So now we're looking at the inside of this chassis. So these are the connectors. All right, so these connectors right here that you see, this long row of connectors, these are mostly wired in parallel. Almost all signals are wired in parallel, but there are some that are not. So there are address ID pins on each slot, which I some of them already have to reverse engineer. So the documentation gives the pin out for this bus, but it's incomplete. So the documentation basically identifies those signals which are wired in parallel across the whole thing. The ones which are unique per slot, those are not documented in the manual, but it was very easy to reverse engineer. I could already tell that some of them are the address ID pins. That's how the card knows, oh, I'm in slot number this or I'm in slot number that. Those are very easy to figure out. And then I'm also guessing there might be, because they have these PCM highways for the four separate. So on this backplane bus, yeah. So on this backplane bus, you have four PCM highways. So there's one PCM highway for each exchange terminal. So each exchange terminal handles 2XT1 or 2XE1, and there's a single PCM highway for both of them. So there's PCM highway 0 that has the 8-pair circuit and one of the A interface. And then PCA highway 1 is going to have two circuits that are both A interface and so on. And so there are four of these PCM highways, but considering that on each of these transcoder cards that goes in there, each transcoder card has to receive and transmit on the A pair, they all have to do that. But then on the A interface, each card in each given slot only has to talk to one particular A interface circuit and not any others. So I have a suspicion, just a hunch, unproven, but I'm guessing that they probably take one of the four PCM highways, and then on the four slot basis, they have them wired to some pins so that the circuits on the card only have to, don't have to select across four different PCM highways. But that's just a guess. I could be wrong. It's just my guess on how this thing is done. So they have one slot for the power supply. So, okay, so this slot on toward this side, if I can get a closer look. So you can see the connector, the backplane connector has pins. So the backplane connector with pins, there are two of them. This is the slot for the power supply. Now, all the other connectors, those are all females. Those are socket connectors. So this is where you get, so all the ones that you're looking at right now, these are the TRCO slots. And then this slot all the way over on the other edge, this is, again, the PCM highway, etc., bus that it shares with the transcoders. And this connector right here, this is the one, we'll see the back of it momentarily, but this is how it talks to the other chassis, to the exchange terminals. So, okay, we've seen everything we can see from this side of the backplane. Let me flip the box upside down and we'll look at the other side of it. Ah, all right, so now we're looking at the backside of the chassis, the rear side of the backplane. Let me see, get a good view here, but positioning of this camera. I'm so not a photographer, not a camera person. Um, but okay, so these here, these connectors that are coming into focus here, these these two, this is how you connect the power. So it runs on 48-volt DC power. And at first, I was very intimidated by these connectors because I could not possibly figure out what the mating part would be. But DigiKey to the rescue. DigiKey in the US, they're really wonderful in that they have an application support team. And so if you're a DigiKey customer, you can just email them saying, hey, I need help identifying this, and they did help me. They pointed me in the right direction, and without charging me anything for the time and support. So definitely love how this company works. So it looks like this is a solved problem now. Now I know which parts I need to buy from DigiKey to make a cable that will mate with this connector over here, this little black one. You can see two of them, the one on the very bottom and the one directly above it, they're wired in parallel. So it's like a redundant supply thing or something. But the two connectors are just wired directly in parallel and buzz them out. Uh, so I'll connect to either one of them. I already have the 48-volt supply. I just need the wiring, so I'll have to get the parts from DigiKey and then wait for the parts to arrive, crimp everything, like all the cables. So it'll be another probably a week or two before I can actually power up this baby and see what happens. But yeah, that's the power interface. And then you can see test points. They're not really test points. They're just through hole connectors. So all the backplane connectors are through hole, and so on the back you can easily probe any of the signals on the PCM highway bus. That was also how I reverse engineered the slot ID just by looking at, because what they have here, the side, the layer and the outside layer of the PCB that's directly underneath the green solder mask, that happens to be the ground plane in this design. And by looking the at the back side, the solder side of those backplane connectors, I could see how where the pin makes a thermal connection to the ground plane. And I could see how the connection is present on some slot and others, and it was very easy from there to figure out what the binary slot ID code is. So that's how I figured that out. So yeah, you can see everything is brought out, but here is the interesting part. Uh, Actually, let me flip this thing out so I can point it more easily. Okay, so I just flip over this unit so I don't have to stretch as far when I'm pointing at this connector. Come on, baby, come into view. All right, so this connector right here is very important because I might end up having to make my own cable that mates to it. So this is the connection to the other backplane. So this is a 3x32 connector. It's the same DIN 41 612 or whatever it is, the so-called Euro connector. Is how they also call it in the manual. You got 32 pins on the long side, 3 rows, so 3 rows of 32 pins, 96 for total. But out of that, only one half, only a 3x16, a 48 pin half of it is the one that connects to the exchange terminal, and then the other half is the alarm bus, which I don't care about. So I don't have a very good idea of what the official cables look like. I don't even have part numbers. That's why, I would love to get an original cable for this so I don't have to fight to make my own. But I'm not sure if I can get an official cable because, one, I don't know the part number, and I don't even know what the official cable was like, how it was structured, because officially when all these things would go into the ginormous rack where you had 8 of these guys plus 4 of the other chassis, then supposedly they already had all these pre-wired according to the manual. So I don't know how it was all done because they would have one exchange terminal chassis go to 2 of these. So maybe they have some weird fancy cable structure to do it. I don't know. So I might have to, yeah, might have to make my own cables. Yeah, But this is currently where we stop because the other chassis, aside from needing to make the cable, the other chassis to which this cable would connect, I have not bought that one yet. So this chassis, uh, the one I need to get is, what is it called? It's called the ET1TC chassis. I still need to buy the chassis from Shield E, and they do have it. They give me the quote and everything. So I need to buy the chassis, and I need to buy the ET2E module that goes inside the chassis. So I guess I can just move to the next slide here because I have some of it covered there. Do I? Yeah. So I have my next plan, next steps. So yeah, I put together these slides before I got the answer from DigiKey. So I put these together last night, my time zone, and it was this morning that I got a reply from DigiKey pointing me to the right connectors. Thank you, DigiKey. So now I'll do all that, and then I'll try powering it up as it is. So if I power up just the chassis that we already looked at, when the TRCO boots up, it will probably be very unhappy in that it will not be able to see, it won't see any exchange terminals connected, which is obviously not a usable system. So I don't know how the firmware will react to that combination, but yeah. It will be an experiment, but then yeah, I still need to acquire this other hardware, and then I'll have to make the necessary cable. Yeah, so this is the DIN number, the DIN 41612. Yes, that is what those things are called. Um, and so let's see, and then this is my last slide. So thank you, Wimpy. Wimpy gave me a little bit of feedback on this one, but let's discuss it while we're all here. Yeah, the Exchange terminal, they have two. First of all, they have ET2A, which is the ANCT1 version, and then they have the ET2E, which is the ETSI E1 version. When I first reached out to Shield D at Harald's recommendation, I went to the marketplace page where you can search for parts, and when I put in all the other names, I originally didn't have part numbers. I originally only knew the names. I knew like TC1C, T1TC, TRCO, TR16S. I knew all these names, but I didn't know the corresponding C numbers, C and a bunch of digits. I didn't know those. But when I started looking up the parts, they were immediately showing up there. And so that's how I was able to proceed to the next step and start asking for quotes, saying, I want to buy these parts. But in the case of ET2A, it does not even show anything. I put in ET2A, it shows no results. I put in ET2E, and then it shows a bunch of C numbers. And that's how I was able to get actual quotes on parts that I can buy for the ET2E. Now, the unfortunate part is the ET2A, the one that's made for T1. That will have a nice and sane design. According to the pictures in the manual, you can see on the ET2A card, it has two of those 8-position jacks. Everybody calls them RJ45, but they're actually RJ48 standard, the pinout for the T1 American interface. So that one is straightforward, but it's unobtainium. The E1 version does not have those nice straightforward jacks, but the E1 version they basically have, I'm not going to read it. It's what it says here on the slide. These are the two options that I can get for the for the E1 module. And so at first I'm thinking, okay, well, I'll get the so-called balanced one with this weird ass 3x16 another DIN connector, but this one is only 3x16, not 3x32. And finding mating parts for the 96-pin DIN connector, those I can find in DigiKey. Now, if I to find in the parts for the 3x16, that the half width, the so-called 1/2 euro connector. DigiKey shows the parts, but the MOQ is like way up into the many thousands of dollars. Memory quantity is just so high because there's such rare parts. So it's like, oh God, would I be screwed trying to find a mating connector? And I was thinking with the coaxial, well, how do I convert from the coaxial one is weird thing. How do I convert from that to, whether it's taking a digital card? but Wimpy replied, pointing me to something on AliExpress, some converter. So I suppose this, since it's my last slide, maybe we'll open now to Q&A on the record where we can discuss some of these things. Where is everybody for the Q&A part?
I'm still here, but I don't have questions right now. Well, maybe one minor question, if you want to report on that, what kind of like order of magnitude in terms of money do you have to spend on this kind of hobby project?
Well, so far, I have no problem telling people. So far, I spent just under $2,000 on this. And the main reason it was so expensive is because, well, let's put it this way. So I only found two sellers who were willing to sell this stuff. So first, there was the Shield E, the one that you recommended to me. Thank you very much. So, and they were the expensive one. There's also a second seller called TXO, just TXO.com. It's like, they got a 3-letter domain name. God, what kind of company is that? How rich do you have to be to have a 3-letter domain name? But yeah, the problem with TXO is they also have most of these parts. In fact, they seem to have a better selection even, and their prices are lower, but they refused to sell to me. At first, one of their salespeople reached out to me and I exchanged some emails with her, and then she just ghosted me. Just ghosted, disappeared. When I tried asking, like, why did you ghost me? Why did you disappear? Then she comes back and saying, "Oh, our compliance manager is not comfortable with selling to you. Can you provide more information about your company?" Now, of course, just even hearing the words or reading the words on the screen, compliance manager, those words to me is pretty like waving a red cloth in front of a rodeo bull, because the very concept of compliance is so anathema to me. You know what kind of person I am. So, my company, if you want to even call it a company, it's, well, I'm not going to say too much on the record here, but I'll let your imagination fill in the blanks. Needless to say, I'm not going to get along very well with people who use phrasing like compliance manager. So that's why I have to pay basically more than double the price. If I could buy at TXO prices instead of Shield G prices, I would probably spend a little less than half of what I did spend. But the way I look at it, losing $2,000 was a much lower price than losing my life. Because again, my personality type, how I react to things being denied to me. So that's how I end up where I am. So yeah, I spent just under $2,000 on the equipment that I already showed, and then the other two parts I have to buy. The quotes I got from Shields E, I think the quote was $335 for the ET2E module and $250 for the chassis it goes into. Of course, the chassis is purely passive; it does nothing. But to have all the right connections, I need the chassis. So, yeah, that's what we're looking at.
Would you be interested in an E1 BTS, a very small one?
Possibly. Certainly, you have to add time budget. Okay, so the E1 BTS that you recommend, are we talking about the Nokia Inside by any chance?
Yes.
Yes, that would actually be my favorite model. Because the interface is standardized. So yeah, I mean the GSM 08.60 and GSM 08.61, they're both official, ETSI specs. Then later they came to GPP, but because you never know what each vendor might do, little here and there. So since my TRAU happens to be Nokia, and as I already explained, why is my TRAU Nokia and not Siemens or Ericsson? Just what I could find. So if I could also get a Nokia Insight to go with it, it would certainly help complete my play environment. Be very helpful.
I think I have two of them here. I don't need two.
What frequency? I assume they're fixed frequency, right?
I don't recall. They might be 1900 even. So it's I think it was some odd, like from my perspective, an odd band. But in the end, I guess it doesn't really matter. You're interested in the what it speaks on ABIS. You don't want to operate it 24/7 somewhere with output power.
Exactly. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. You know, on the experiments, it's the lowest power, maybe even the wire that's set up sometimes because don't want to piss off FCC. Don't be doing that. But yeah, so that's a good. Now, the other thing I wanted to get people's feedback on here. So one of my next steps, well, my immediate next step is buying the parts from DigiKey to make the power cable. That will be very cheap because thankfully those connectors, the power connectors that application support engineer from DigiKey recommended to me, those are cost nothing. So that's just the time. No money really there. So I'll get this puppy powered up. But then for the next step of getting the exchange terminal, because without the exchange terminal, this thing cannot possibly operate. So to get the exchange terminal, I have to buy one from Shield E, and I have to choose which version to buy. Because I can buy the version with the coaxial, or I can buy the version with the 3 by this weird TX16. It's just that despite me being Russian in other ways, in terms of telecom culture, I consider myself an American because I learned all my telecom knowledge here. So being an American in terms of telecom culture, I'm much more familiar with T1 than E1. E1 is this foreign thing to me. So, but for you guys, it's the opposite. So if someone can educate me a little bit on this whole coaxial E1 versus the balanced version, and that balloon or the adapter that Wimpy recommended to me, can someone explain to me how this works?
Well, Wimpy is here, so
Yeah,
maybe he wants to take this up.
yeah, it'd be nice.
Yeah, it's quite simple. There are several interfaces on different kinds of equipment where you can actually jump between 75 and 120 ohm. And if you can't, you just use a balloon and put it in the cable, and that's it.
So basically, if I were to buy that item that you sent me a link to on AliExpress, so that item, it's a passive, right? There's no power in it. It's a purely passive adapter.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So obviously, I need to buy two of them. Okay, they're cheap. So I buy two of those because I need to have two E1 circuits, one for the A and one for the A-TER. So I buy two of them. I'll connect one side. So on the coaxial side, there'll just be a pair of little 75 ohm coaxes from that widget to the terminal, to the equipment, right?
Yeah.
And then on the other side, on the 120 ohm side, does it have a conventional like RJ45, RJ48 style jack?
Yes. Completely.
Okay. Okay, so it has a traditional jack. Okay, so it's the same type of a jack as like an ICE1 USB and those types of devices, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm familiar with. In America, we call it a T1 style jack. I don't know what it's called in Europe, but okay. So I'll get those now on the coaxial side. The connector type that's on the exchange terminal on the TRAU, I think it's an SMB. I have to double check, but I think it's SMB. The coaxial connectors on a little widget. What kind of coax connectors are they?
That's BNC.
Okay, they're BNC. Okay, so I will need a cable that goes from BNC to SMB. I might have one somewhere. I'll have to look.
Yeah, in any case, those are standard adapters that should be available inexpensively somewhere.
Okay. So I should be able to just buy a piece of 75 ohm coax with a BNC on one end and an SMB on the other end.
Yeah, or if you want to, you can of course also crimp it yourself. But I think, I mean, what's actually more likely even is that you get a single metal piece adapter, like a without a cable that adapts from BNC to SMB or whatever other standard, then you can use a BNC to BNC cable. But yeah, I'm sure you can also find pigtails with those two connectors.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm getting the impression that this might be a route of less pain than the 3x16, DIN 41612 connector, this 1/2 C or whatever they call it, because yeah, it's like where would the mating parts for that one seem to be. But yeah, I'll think about it. I mean, the worst case, I'll lose $335 by buying, if I buy one version, I'm like, yeah, I usually got another one. I might get both. So we'll see. So I guess that's where this experiment stands. Oh, okay. So Harold, on that Nokia Inside, what kind of E1 interface does that one have?
Normal balanced twisted pair. And I think it might even be able to do T1. I have to check. It's been ages since I last used
No,
it.
but physical connector.
Yeah, physically I would say it's an RJ45, but you say it's an RJ48. But anyway, it's a twisted pair balanced connector.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I was again, the cultural difference. Because when I saw how Nokia used a completely different connector for E1 versus T1, me knowing nothing about European culture, I'm wondering, is it like a cultural difference? Is it true that in the European telecommunications culture you are used to those other connectors, and not the US style?
I think in the telecom culture in Europe, you don't use twisted pair connectors traditionally at all. So I've found so many different connectors or terminals for E1 circuits on equipment. I think there was no real standard used at all. It's just you have some pins on some connector that is the TX pair, and you have some other pins on another connector that's the RX pair, and yeah, that's it.
Okay, so that's how they did it on the TRAU. Yeah, that's the approach. Yeah, because they have
for example, on these V5 axis multiplexers that we play with, they have again some completely non-standard. I mean, of course it's a DIN standard connector, but it's not like a standardized for E1 usage. And there's 4 E1 lines on a multi-pin connector.
So the connector is also a DIN. Is this also a DIN 41612 family?
I don't recall. I wrote it down somewhere in the wiki.
No, but is it 3 rows by 16 pins or anything like that? Is it
it's 3 rows, yes, but how many pins? I have to double check.
Because if you can help me find a mating part for that, that would also solve my problem. Maybe in Europe it's easier to get those types of connectors. I don't know.
Well, I think actually the connector I'm using has 1 row less pins or something, like 3 rows, but only 15 or 14 instead of 16, and it still fits into or something like that. I have to double check again.
Yeah.
I think it was the standard 16 by 3.
64/3?
16 by 3.
Oh, so it is a 16 by 3.
I think so, yeah.
Well, if you can get me the mating part for that,
So I'm just checking, just posting the wiki page for the Exos node control unit.
Yeah, now you can hear those construction people just outside banging away. Let's see. All right, there we go. Node control unit, 120 ohms.
Yeah, I think I have a harding part number there.
Yes, the part number is correct. In fact, let me put this number into DigiKey, and I'm pretty sure it was giving me a cost prohibitive MOQ when I looked. Let me look.
No, in my case it says 17 units in stock, and it costs 12 euros per unit. So
Hold on. Let me look. Maybe it's a different part. Let's take a look here.
it's not ideal because I think it's meant for wire wrap or for through hole or whatever. But I mean, it's sufficient.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying because it's not the official one. Yeah. Okay. I see let's see, what gender is this? Okay, so this is the receptacle, and the one. Okay, I see. Okay, so the idea is to basically use this. Yeah, that might work because it's all a hack anyway. Okay, so what you're doing is you're using this part, and using that part, you just connect to the wires on the back of it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I actually think I used a different one because I don't recall those long pins, but it's the same in principle. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, because I was looking at the ones that are meant to be like mount on a cable, and yeah, it was showing just complete unobtainium.
I think it's more this one I posted. I mean, can check my order history if it matters, but I mean, in general, the principle is all the same. But this.
Oh
looks...
yeah, I get it. Yeah. Yes. So it is indeed DIN 41612. Yep, that's exactly what. Yeah, also known as Euroconnector C/2.
Yeah, and I just soldered to the. I mean, I even used whatever, a clipper to clip all the pins that are not used to make more space for soldering, so they're not as dense, because only I think a third or so of the pins are used.
Same thing. It's the exact same concept. Okay, so maybe that's what European vendors did, because yeah, the concept is exactly the same on this.
It is a Nokia device that I'm using, so that might be.
Oh.
Right. This access multiplexer is also Nokia, so maybe it's some Nokia internal standard or something. Who knows?
Yeah, could be. Another thing that I find so curious. So they call it a Euro connector, yet the spacing is 2.54 millimeters, the inch-based spacing. I thought people in Europe just hate the inch-based standards.
Well, I think it's just standard for PCBs and many connectors. I don't think metric pin spacing in kind of rectangular connectors, I don't think is very commonly used. I mean, unless you go to like 2 millimeters, which is smaller, but I think it's always 2.54, and the 2.5 would be very odd to find.
Well, there was a time when DIP packages came in 2.5 millimeter, which wasn't a big problem for the smaller types like 16 or maybe 20 pins, but 28 or even 40 pins, you had a bit of a problem.
Yeah, in any case, so I clipped the non-used pins and I soldered to those, and I just put shrink tube around the solder to make sure that it doesn't make a short circuit or something.
Yeah, that's probably what I'll do. Yeah, that'll probably be the easiest approach than screwing around with the coaxial cables.